And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us here today on this Tuesday. I'm your host, Shaun Haney, founder of Real Agriculture. Really looking forward to today's discussion. Life is good. Spring is in the air. The Blue Jays are 3-1. What could be wrong with this world whatsoever? Okay, we're going to talk today about poultry. I'm not going to sort of pretend to be some sort of poultry expert, but I'm really looking forward to learning. Canadian agriculture is so diverse. There's so many different things happening across the country, and the poultry industry is just, another one of the examples where there's a lot of really good stuff happening. There are some opportunities. There also are some challenges. We don't cover poultry here on a daily basis, but I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. If you want to participate with comments or questions, all you have to do is enter your text in the box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. That's right, Lindsay. We are talking about the Blue Jays. We are sportsing. That's good. 3-1 start. Bullpen is looking legit, let me tell you. Okay, let's bring in today's guest. It is Mike Naylor. He is the interim CEO of the Chicken Farmers of Ontario, based out of Guelph. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I got that right. Guelph, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
awesome. Good stuff. So, interim CEO, we'll maybe hit on that really quickly. This is but not your first stint with Chicken Farmers of Ontario.
Yeah, that's right. My first job at a university 20-something years ago was with Chicken Farmers of Ontario as the board economist, and I was there for 8 years before moving on to other things.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, well, let's talk about the overall from a poultry perspective to lead off here. How many members in Ontario? How many people producing poultry? And also, let's break down the differences inside the sector. Just like beef, where we have ranchers, we have commercial operation, we have a feed yard, backgrounder. In the case of poultry, we have a couple different designations as well, layers and broilers. So maybe lead off with number of members and then break down the different segments of the industry.
Yeah, so I represent the Chicken Farmers of Ontario. So we're a provincial organization that represents 1,300 farmers across Ontario. They're also egg producers, so the eggs that you eat, every morning for breakfast. There's turkeys, obviously, that Thanksgiving, Christmas, April, the deli meat, that turkey, they're separate, as well as the Broiler Hatching Egg and Chick Commission, and they're the ones that supply chicken farmers with day-old chicks. So it's a joint organization between hatcheries and broiler producers.
Okay, and so is that number of 1,300? Is it growing in the province of Ontario, or like are you having to work to find new members? How does that look?
There's always people looking to get in, but there's always people retiring, and some of the people they buy and sell their farms. So there's always it's very fluid.
Yeah.
Back when I was around 14 years ago, the number was around 1,100. So it has grown over the years, but it's fluid, but probably with an uptick.
That's awesome. And so, what are some of the things, Mike, that you're doing to try to attract people into the poultry business?
Yeah, so a couple of things that we've done, and this is one of the things that back in my first go around was probably one of the things that maybe we weren't as good at because we were working on the issues and we weren't focused as much on bringing in new growers. But what we heard from potential new clients is that much like with farming in general, it's expensive to get in, right? If you want to grow cash crop, land is at a premium. Chicken farming is no different. The cost to entry can be big, depending on the size of your operation. So what the board has done is back in 2005, they implemented a new entrant producer policy, which allowed producers to apply, one time a year, and depending on the year, they accepted anywhere from 2 to 5 new entrant producers. And essentially, what that allowed for them is, an easier transition into producing chicken. So once you're accepted, you get all the support. You get the on-farm training. We're 100% digital in terms of forms. There's no more forms anymore. 100% digital. You get training on all that. Yeah. You get training with the processors and the general industry stuff. But the really big deal is, as a new entrant, as an approved new entrant, you get what is essentially a loan of quota. So today we have a minimum requirement to be a producer in Ontario. You need to have a minimum of 14,000 quota units, and as a potential new entrant producer, you agree to buy 400,000 units, and the board will supply you with 10,000 units, and that will get you to the 14,000 minimum. And then over time, there's certain milestones that you have to replace those units that have been loaned to you with units that you acquire on your own. And so, but that time frame is fairly long. It's 15 years. So what it does is it allows growers to more easily finance their operations over time. So as they become, into the business, growing the business, making money, they're able to finance and acquire. So after 5 years, after 10 years, there's certain thresholds that you have to meet in terms of buying back that quota that was loaned to you. So at the end of 15 years, you're on your own. You might have the minimum 14. You may have bought more. You may have acquired more units or more farms along the way. But that's a way that the board felt was a fair way to get more people in. And since it's a fairly new program, right? So it's only been around since 2015, and so far there have been I think 32 new farm families that have entered the industry, and I believe they're all still active.
Yep. And so is the quota managed like provincially across the country, or is there?
Yeah,
okay.
A great question. So each province has their own version of Chicken Farmers of Ontario, and each province manages their own supply managed chicken system. So they deal with their own producers. So that's all provincial, and then so each province will have their own set of rules and regulations and policies. So the policy I'm speaking to is specific to Ontario.
Okay. Lindsay watching on Facebook has a question. Does chicken quota value change or is it capped?
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not capped. It changes over time, and we don't regulate the price of quota. Kind of think of it as farm value or farmland. It's traded in the free market. We administer the quota transfers. We don't, unlike the dairy industry, and I think they still do this. We don't have a quota exchange per se. That happens outside of us, but we're involved in the approval of quota transfers as well as the implementation of the rules and regulations around that.
Okay. I got some hard hitting serious questions, but I got a fun one too. We were talking on Twitter earlier with some of the audience. What is the best chicken wing flavor in your opinion?
Hands down, hot butter from a place in Guelph called Fat Duck. And if you're in the Guelph area, go to the Fat Duck, get the hot butter wings. Basically, it's a butter base with, and for years we tried to figure it out, but it's basically hot butter with this spice called sambal. You find it in the grocery store near the chili garlic. It's like this red peppers, and it's fantastic.
Really? I got to check that out next time in Guelph. Whenever I get to travel again, that I'm hitting up the Fat Duck.
And if you want to do it at home, the ratio is 2-to-1. So whatever you're putting in for butter, or whatever you're putting in for sambal, you put 2 times of that in for butter.
Beauty.
And don't over sauce your wing. I repeat, do not over sauce your wing. That's a classic mistake.
The pub down the street from me, they have what is it? It's like a maple mustard. It's a good one too. I love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, back to my serious questions. I had some suggestions here. Oh, somebody said pumpkin spice. I don't know about that. Cotton. There's a really crappy bar in Grand Prairie that serves cotton candy wings. No
That's
thanks. Smoked dill pickle. That sounds pretty good.
I'd try that.
Yeah, I would too. What's your opinion on boneless wings? It's just like it's a glorified chicken finger, but what do you think?
It's a chicken finger. It's almost insulting to the chicken wing to call it that. So I'm totally against it. If you want to have a chicken finger, I'm all for it. If you want to have a buffalo chicken finger, I think that's what this is.
Yeah.
Just call it that. Don't call it chicken wing.
Yeah, I love it. Good stuff. Okay, let's get back to some of the things that are happening here. We talked about attracting new producers. What about in terms of how the protein complex breaks down? A lot of times we talk about, of course, beef and pork and poultry. Do you view those other protein suppliers as competitors, or do you look at the overall protein complex and the demand?
Uh, well, both within the obviously for us, the more protein people eat in generally, let's grow the pie, right? And that includes plant based. The
Okay.
more people protein that they eat, we're all going to be better off. But within that, we're competitors, right? So we compete with beef, we compete with pork, we compete with the plant based stuff as well. And we think we have a good story to tell, and so we're happy to compete. And I think we lead the way in terms of per capita consumption among all the meats.
Yeah, yeah. So when you compare chicken versus, say, the plant-based proteins, because when you go to a beef meeting, this gets a lot of attention, right? It definitely has caught people's attention, the growth of plant-based proteins or the opportunity for it to grow. When you compare yourselves versus the plant-based sector, what are do you feel are some of the competitive advantages that you have? What's the story that you tell?
Yeah, I think for us, it's not that we don't think it's a competitor. I think I think the impact is more on the pork and beef side than it is in the chicken side.
Hmm.
I mean, anecdotally, I know lots of people that don't eat red meat, but they'll eat chicken, or they don't eat right. And you don't hear a lot of people that don't eat chicken but eat red meat. So I think this the more direct substitute for these plant based is the beef and pork. It doesn't mean that we're not concerned and we don't watch it, but we're not at our meetings. It's not top of mind. It's not the first thing that we talk about.
Yep. Well, you had your AGM last week. What are some of the things that poultry producers in Ontario are the most concerned about? What comes when they have those open bear pit sessions and people come to the mic? Obviously, it's a little bit different now with COVID and some of the virtual meetings. But what are some of the issues that people are bringing up as really threats to their operations?
Yeah, I mean when you think about supply management, Shaun, you think about the three pillars of supply management, which are production discipline, uh, uh, managing imports, and then pricing. So if you go to any annual meeting or any meeting, district meeting, if you're not talking about production, imports, or live price, you're probably at the wrong meeting,
Mm.
right? So those are the three key things this year. In addition to those, you've got obviously the whole issue of COVID, which has taken over, I think, everybody's business, including our own. You've got the issue of antimicrobial use, uh, you know, food safety, all those issues. But those pillars and then COVID were probably the four top ones this go around.
So how do you view the path through COVID here? Of course, not to the other side of it, as the vaccine rollout continues, sort of in Canada. Um, how has it impacted the poultry industry?
Uh, it's interesting when I joined the group not that long ago. I hadn't really thought about the impacts on poultry, right? Because it's you hear more on the news, you hear about more of the beef plants and that kind of thing, and I got thinking about that, and chicken wasn't top of mind, but being immersed in it for the last little while, you kind of get a better appreciation for some of the challenges, and so when it first hit, you know, to be fair, we had not planned for a human health crisis
Right.
as part of our plan. I don't think anybody had. Uh, but fortunately for us, we had been planning for years and years and years about a avian flu outbreak or something like that, an animal disease. So we had planned and had systems in place to manage that. And so that training we kind of used to help guide our discussion and decision making on the on the COVID scenario. Uh, I think we were pretty well positioned as a chicken industry in so much as one, we were on a growth curve, right? So things were already going pretty well. We'd had 10 straight years of per capita growth, of production growth, and really 35 years trend line growth of production and people wanting chicken. So we had a good base of understanding that consumers still want to eat chicken. COVID is not going to stop that. But what we didn't appreciate was how they were going to eat their chicken, right? So if you think about the balance between food service and retail, that's what dramatically changed, right? So when COVID hit, all of a sudden all the restaurants are shut down, and we have a supply chain that's conditioned to have these processors serve part of this market. So this Swiss Chalet, St. Hubert's, KFC, Mary Brown's, Popeyes. These ones do further processed. These ones do the retail. And all of a sudden, that was thrown up in the air because the ones that serviced the food service all of a sudden had all this extra chicken, and the ones that serviced the retail, for example, all of a sudden didn't have enough chicken
Yeah.
because everybody's buying their chicken at retail. And if you remember the very first weeks of the pandemic, going in the grocery store, oh geez, there's nothing on the shelf, and then that was more of a panic buying than anything else,
Yeah.
because initially, at least, the COVID portion of it didn't impact our processors. That eventually evolved as we solved the challenge with the balance of retail versus restaurant. We then moved on to the supplemental challenge of, now we're starting to have, or what do we do if we have issues at poultry plants, and how do you manage that? And because the very nature of the chicken industry is such that it's very intertwined. Processors, producers, further processors, feed mills, everybody talks a lot of the time. I'm sure it's the same in other words in other sectors, but I think for us it's a little bit different just because of the nature of supply management.
Mm-hmm.
So I think because of that, we already had those connections. So if processor A, they had a scare, they had to shut down a line for a day or two and disinfect. We had other processors that could pick up the slack, and that really helped us. And there was, I don't want to say seamless because it probably wasn't seamless, but from a consumer perspective, they probably didn't notice. They maybe might have noticed in the grocery store that maybe you're seeing chicken breasts that are a bit bigger than you're used to seeing.
Right.
Just like on the egg side, you go and you see, all of a sudden you see those flats of eggs that the restaurant industry uses, and all of a sudden they're at my local Loblaws. Well, that's weird. That's because they didn't have a home for those.
They were
It's the same.
redirected.
That's right. So
Yeah.
all that, as they were sort of going through that process, they had to redirect that meat. So you got the nice big wings at the grocery store that usually get the smaller ones. The bigger breasts that usually would go to further processing, those had to find a home. And as you work through those, things are relatively back to normal. But I think what allowed us to be as successful as we have been is the very nature of our industry, and the efficiency that the chicken has relative to, say, a beef cow.
Yeah.
Right. So a chicken, you're growing an average sized chicken in 6 to 7 weeks versus a year and a half to 2 years for a beef cow. So imagine how much quickly you can respond to changes in the market. And because we're supply managed, we're able to manage that more effectively in a more centralized way. And so we were able to respond by going back to the allocations that we had set, and we set allocations once every 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We go back to the allocations that we had set and say, is that the right number given what's going on? And we were able to adjust. And for a couple of periods, we adjusted down to help take some of that slack, really from the restaurant side, so that we didn't end up with a huge oversupply of chicken in the grocery market. We wanted to make sure everybody stayed profitable. Wanted to make sure that consumers still got the chicken that they needed, but we wanted to make sure it was done in an orderly fashion. Yep. And that's what having chickens that grow in 6 to 7 weeks, that kind of system allows.
Yeah, no kidding. The feeding time to get to a fattened chicken is shorter. The gestation is way shorter. Like you're able to, like you said, you can look at what the trend is in a short period of time, not looking out 2 years. You're looking over a much shorter period of time. You can be really responsive.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're blessed with that our friends down the street at the turkey board maybe had more of a challenge with was that turkey traditionally is more holidays, right? That's family gatherings, it's getting together, and right, no Thanksgiving, no Christmas, no Easter twice. Yeah. But that hurts. So we're not doing as great as we want to be, but we're very, very fortunate to be in this position that we're in.
Cool. Now you mentioned imports. I remember during the NAFTA talks and when they're putting together the CUSMA or USMCA deal, the dairy component of those, the changes, it gets a lot of attention, but there was changes in the poultry perspective as well. What kind of impact is that going to have?
Yeah. So again, so when you talk about the pillars of supply management, it's really discipline, production discipline, and imports are on the supply side, right? And it's how much you produce and how much you import really determines the amount of supply, right? So traditionally it's been 7.5% of the previous year's production is what's allowed for imports. As part of this negotiation, that's changed from a percentage to an actual number, and there was some slippage. There was some slippage both at Kuzma, I think at the TPP, the CPTPP, whatever it's called, that one. So there's now going to be allowed more imports tomorrow than there was allowed yesterday, and that has an impact, right?
Yeah.
Because those imports can come in at any point during the year. They're not required to come in, so many. You have to use 1/12 in January, 1/12 in February, all the way through. They can bring them in as they see fit. So it makes the job of managing supply a little bit trickier, and something that we weren't pleased with. But it's the reality of the outcome, and we will manage through it.
Now, there's been issues for a while, even pre USMCA deal, on spent fowl, and some of the complaints from the Canadian side to what the American side is doing. Can you talk about that a little bit and what the issue is?
Yeah. So spent fowl are essentially laying hens that have lived their life, so they're like an old chicken. And traditionally, going back years and years, that was the kind of chicken that was used in soup. Today, for the most part, in the good soups, it's real chicken. But the issue is that spent fowl can enter the country without a tariff, or with very low tariff. And but if you have chicken, you need to have either an import permit, or you have to pay the tariff, and the tariff is designed to be high to limit the number of imports. And what's happened over time is people have realized that when you're bringing eviscerated chicken across the border, it's hard to tell when you're looking at it if it's spent fowl or if it's chicken. So what we found is that there's been an increasing trend of fraudulent imports of spent fowl that are actually chicken, which is a major problem, right? So it's first problem is it's illegal, and you're circumventing the system and putting more supply on the market than otherwise would have been. One, two, you're impacting the custody of the chain of custody of supply, right? Because all of a sudden that's getting lost because it's being mislabeled. Three, the government's missing out on what would have been revenue from the tariff, and there's one other one I forget, but those are four pretty good ones.
Yeah.
And it's the consumer stuck to thinking they're getting one thing, and maybe it's another.
It's like essentially bringing, labeling something a cold cow and bringing in a finished heifer. It's kind of
That's exactly the same thing.
okay.
And so there's DNA tests that are available that can distinguish that at the border, and we're working with CFC manages this file more than Chicken Farmers of Canada manages it more than we do, but they're working with the government to try to implement this DNA testing to make sure it's honest and true what's coming in.
Okay. What about the carbon tax? A lot of times in the terms of the carbon tax, we hear about grain drying and people searching for exemptions there. I've been in a few poultry barns. They are not cool places. They are warm. They require heat. How is the carbon tax impacting poultry producers in the province of Ontario?
Yeah, so obviously, like everybody else, they've got to pay more, right? And it's about how do you recover that? And then fortunately for us, and we haven't seen this flow through yet because it's still new, but we work on what's called a live price formula, where it's conceptually the idea is that farmers get paid a fixed margin, and then the price adjusts every 8 weeks based on the price of feed and the price of chicks, and then once a year you renegotiate all the other factors and you update all the other factors, and one of those factors is energy. And the way you update those is generally through some sort of consumer price index. and we're hopeful that the CPI will cover that, so that that kind of extra cost will be accounted for in that consumer price index. And if that plays out to be true, then we're in a much better spot than some of the other commodities. The challenge becomes that that gets flowed through to processors, who then have to flow it through to retailers or restaurants. And depending on the situation, a lot of times their pricing is formulaic as well, based on off the live price. So eventually that ends up in the
Yeah.
consumer's pocket. And I'm not sure if that is the intent
Not
of
supposed to
this.
be.
It's not supposed to be, right? And and so that's part of the challenge. We think we're in a good spot in terms of protecting producers. We don't know that for sure yet, but that's kind of the thinking now. But there's a broader issue around competitiveness at a a grocery store level or a restaurant level.
Yeah. So, and there's not a lot of substitute, right? Like you can't heat your poultry barn with solar power or
Nope.
wind power. Like that fuel has to be burned, right?
It's like a lot of things in agriculture. It's inelastic. Doesn't matter what the price is. You've got to do it. And imagine putting uh, day old chicks in your barn in the dead of winter. You've got to heat your barn, and it's got to be warm, and that costs a lot, and that price just went up a lot,
Yeah.
right? So that's a big deal.
It doesn't make sense to me. Not the outcome is not the original intent. If there's not a substitute activity for farmers to try to heat their barns, then all we're doing in this case is raising the price of a good protein
Yeah.
product from poultry. Okay,
Mhm.
so my son, Carson, he loves chicken sandwiches. Like he's tried them all. He has gone across the city here in Lethbridge trying to figure out what is the best chicken sandwich. What's your favorite?
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because during COVID, there's nothing to do. So we got together with the neighbors on the street, outdoors, socially distanced, and we went and got every chicken sandwich. We got the KFC one, the Popeyes one, and the Mary's one.
Yeah.
And bang on, they're all fantastic. The consensus at that group was Popeyes was best,
Really?
and it wasn't unanimous. There are a lot of people like the Mary Browns, and a lot of people like the KFC, but the bun on the Popeyes, I think, did it for me.
Okay.
The bun and the pickles.
Bun
And
and
who
the
would have thought
pickles.
pickles on a chicken sandwich, but it's delicious.
Well, pickles do make a sandwich.
Yeah.
That I will definitely agree with. I think his conclusion was he loves the Mary Browns. That's his favorite for sure. Yeah. Jason watching on Facebook says the Browns Nashville hot chicken. So
I've,
there
I've,
you go.
I've had Nashville Browns, sorry, Nashville hot chicken. I went to Nashville. I like hot food, so I went to that famous chicken place.
Yeah.
Ordered it hot. Don't do that.
Blew your doors off.
Blew my doors off. Big mistake. Couldn't even enjoy it.
Hey, that's fantastic. Hey, Mike, I really appreciate you joining us here today on RealAg Live. A really good discussion, allowing the real agriculture audience to learn a little bit more about poultry production. It's something we don't necessarily cover on a daily basis. We have a lot of listeners that do have barns, and I really do appreciate you joining us here today to fill us all in. Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime, Shaun.
Okay, I want to encourage everybody to check out RealAg Radio today on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. As well, tomorrow we're going to be talking about the Canadian Dairy Expo. It's on tomorrow and Thursday, so we're going to hear all about that from Jordan Underhill. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. Chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.